Justice, Accelerating Ambition, and Implementation on Adaptation Early Warnings for All. It's quite a mouthful, right? Yeah. But the panel will do justice to it, so we are thankful that they are all here, and one or two persons will join us online. To moderate this session is a lady that we can call the modern storyteller. She is the visionary behind the Scoop Storytelling Initiative, which is a non-profit digital media platform dedicated to amplifying the voices of the underrepresented. She is also a professional who has, in her journey, worked with the BBC in Lagos. She's received commendation from the Wale Soyinka Award for Investigative Journalism and selected as a Mandela Washington Fellow, which was sponsored by the US Department of State. Her remarkable achievements have propelled her into the ranks of the Queen Elizabeth Commonwealth Trust. She has also been recognized as a budget-active citizen for her exceptional work with the Scoop. Please join me as we welcome Zainab Bala, our moderator for this session. Thank you, Zainab. We'll share some of the storytelling skills this afternoon. It's already afternoon, right? Thank you. Thank you, Zainab. And we also have with us a distinguished professor with a PhD in geography. He's worked with the United Nations Development Program in Nigeria. They did indicate that he's retired, but we know that he's not tired. Climate and climate issues never get tired. So we welcome Professor of Climatology of the Department of Geography, University of Lagos, Professor Emmanuel Oladipo. Thank you very much, sir, Prof. We are so very happy to have you here with us. She specializes in climatology with a focus on climate change, drought, desertification, and he's put his skills at work across the world. We're also very happy to have here with us another remarkable African, who was appointed the Youth Climate Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General and also a gender negotiator for the Gambia, with 7 years of experience in climate change policy and advocacy, community development, and gender equality work. She's delivered projects at the national, global levels, impacting thousands of people. She founded Clean Earth Gambia, one of the biggest youth-led environmental NGOs in the Gambia, and has served as policy lead on gender at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change Youth Consistency since COP 2023 up until COP 27. Let's welcome Fatou Jeng. Can we do the applause a lot more robustly, please? Thank you. Thank you. She came all the way from the Gambia to tell us about this and share experience with us. You're welcome, Fatou. Bubu Patejalo is the former head of the Gambian delegation to the UNFCCC. Will be joining us online. But we're also very proud and happy to have here with us the climate officer, economics section of the United States Embassy in Abuja. Please join me as we welcome Mr. Nussbaumer James. You're most welcome. Thank you. We'll add color and height to the panel. Thank you very much. Any other? All good? So you're good to go. Zainab, continue the storytelling. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here to talk about a very important topic. Climate change is a global emergency, and you agree with me that Nigeria has had its own share of the devastating impact of climate change. And so we're going to make this session as brief as possible because we're way behind schedule. And so this session is meant to acknowledge the rapidly changing climate and the consequences it has on our environment, and also to help address the gap of climate communication and early warning systems. And so I'm going to go straight up to the questions, and I'm going to direct this to Professor Emmanuel Oladipo, Professor of Criminology, Department of Geology, UNILAG. And so the first question would be, how can climate change be defined and understood in the context of adaptation strategies with a specific focus on early warning systems?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be in the midst of the very, very young people. Very, very young. But I'm learning so much. I came in about 30 minutes ago, and I think I've gained so much within the last 30 minutes. Nothing that these young ones said here today is a lie. I've been in the university system since the 70s, and 1982 I started with my PhD. So a lot of things are going on. But as a system, it will continue to go on and it will change from time to time. And exactly what we are talking about now in this session is like that. The climatic system is very complex, it's very dynamic. It changed in the past, it's changing now, it will continue to change in the future. You and I will live very soon, but when even those of you that may live at the end of this century, you will still be talking about climate change, so don't worry about it. But if it's something that we have to be talking about if we die and live and go on, then it means we must know as much as possible about it and see how much we can really do to make sure its impact does not really affect us. And that's what we mean by trying to adapt. And we always get carried away with a lot of these terminologies. It's a very simple thing. If your room is too hot for you, what do? And you don't have AC. You look for an artificial fan and find yourself to cool down. You're adapting to that condition at that time. Simple. But the climate change is a bit more complex, and it's always more interesting to know that you can do one or two things, but you cannot do too much other than try to move along with it. And one of the ways by which we are trying to understand and try to use technology to try to adapt to these changes that the climatic system generates upon us, like the floods, is to try to work with what we call early warning system. And the early warning system is simply a signal made up of various equipments that can tell you what is likely to happen. I'm sure every day you watch your TV, and NIMET tells you it's going to be sunny, and it's going to be cloudy, and it's going to rain in Kano, thunderstorms in Taraba. Those are some of the early warning system signals coming in. But in the case of climate change, we are very concerned that this is a global problem, regardless of who caused it and who didn't cause it. And I want to make certain things clear, which may not be too comfortable with some of the younger ones that some believe, oh, the developed nations caused climate change, and therefore they should be responsible. I say yes, but don't forget that the climate in its natural system changes, whether they are human beings or not. The earth is over 66 million years old. Don't worry about what our Bible or Quran say. And the climate has been changing. I want to give you an example. If you read some of the things, under the Sahara Desert in Namibia, they found the largest reservoir of water. What does that indicate to you? It means at that time, at one time or the other, some thousands of years ago, It was raining a lot in the Namibia desert area. That is in the Kalahari. So that's when it changed from being very wet to extremely dry. The Sahara Desert had a lot of water too. So these changes are taking place. But what we are concerned about is the immediate ones that are affecting us. What can we really do? Early warning systems are what we can establish. They consist of equipment which are made up of satellite imagery, gauges, and all the rest, real-time information that can use. They are called multi-hazard early warning systems. And they are very important to help us understand that we, particularly in Africa, that we are contributing only about 3% of the so-called greenhouse gases that are modulating the climatic conditions to these extreme events. But we are most vulnerable. 70% of the calamities that are taking place as a result of climatic conditions between 1990 and 2021 are taking place in Africa. This is also an area where less than 40% of the people even have any means of understanding what the climate change is all about, or even have any means of looking at the impacts of climate change through the early warning system. And therefore, what is being proposed now is like some of those guys that just left. That's what they call the Internet of Things, IoT, that you can use. That's what we call the AI, the artificial intelligence systems that can really be put in places under your watch that you can use to try to have an impression. I want to start by giving you an example. We keep on talking about impact of the floods in Nigeria. It is really amazing. I'm not happy about that. We know that the Lado Dam must release water every year. They must release water, whether it's flooding or not. So there must have been a sort of tele-equipment that should be able to tell us, how is this water flowing? Where is it likely to reach? When is it likely to reach the place? Those are the things that the AI system are being put up together to do. And finally, even without this, with these artificial intelligence systems that can use, let us do simple things first. Just like we have security agents or hunters in your community to monitor whether people are going to cause trouble or not, you can have community early warning advisors that will be listening to the radio, listening to all the information coming from hydrological services, NIMET, and informing the community. Understand that the flood has reached Yola, and it's likely to reach Makurdi in the next 1 week. With that type of information, people in Makurdi should prepare themselves and be able to do that. I think that's what it's all about. That the climate justice factor is that we cannot continue allowing the system where we do not contribute much to allow us to continue to impact us as much as negatively as possible. But I argue that it should not be that we should just wait and say until they pay, because of what they've done, we do nothing. Because the flood doesn't know whether you pay for it or not. When it comes, it wipes us our systems and our livelihoods, and the people will not be able to pay back later. So let's work on it. Let's all be active. Let us all talk about climate change to make it possible for us to understand what is it all about and how we can respond to it, to limit its impact. We cannot stop it, but to limit its impact on our lives, on our well-being, and development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. I'm glad that you highlighted that the terminologies in climate change are some of the things that make people confused as to what climate change is all about. But I'm glad that in the last year there has been drastic mobilization, advocacy, and sensitization around issues of climate change. We have journalists going through workshops, just like CGID has been doing over the years, just to kind of equip our local journalists with certain terminologies and how to go about reporting climate change issues. We have CSOs also dealing in areas of climate justice and climate adaptation and so on. And so my next question is going to be to Dr. Daniel Tutu, the Director of Climate Change Unit of the Environmental Protection Agency of Ghana. And my question is going to be that what are the primary challenges or obstacles that currently hinder the equitable delivery of climate justice in African countries? Is Dr. Daniel here with us? He's not. Well, so I think we're going to just switch to the next person. And so, Fatou, let me ask this to you. What policy or governance structures have proven effective in promoting equity and inclusivity in the implementation of early warning systems?
Thank you so much, Zainab, and thank you, Prof. I think Prof has done a really good job in just giving us a breakdown of the key terminologies as well as just what we need to understand as far as climate change and early warning system is concerned. And just to start from what he said about the fact that climate change is a global problem, but it requires local solutions because we all face different realities of climate change. What the global north faces in terms of climate impacts is completely different from what we in Africa or in the global south actually face. As such, it's really important we have different approaches for early warning system to be inclusive and effective. And based on the work that we've been doing over the years and based on what I've seen from other countries, especially the best approaches they've actually been able to have and governance structures, I'll say for early warning to be actually effective and efficient, one, it needs to be decentralized and community-based. I think this is quite important because, as I've mentioned, for instance, maybe even the climate realities that we are facing, for instance, in Lagos will completely be different or might have some differences with the climate realities in Abuja. Maybe Abuja might be experiencing more of heat wave and Lagos might be experiencing more of flooding. So for us to ensure that there's like an effective approach, we need to make sure that it is decentralized in the sense that decision making is actually given to people in the local communities or in our local areas to make not only decisions but also implement early warning systems in the sense that they are going to make sure that community or the people are actually consulted and involved in the processes that are made with decisions and activities concerning early warning system. That way, we are going to make sure that the different realities that people are facing are incorporated. Because at some point, sometimes the reason why some climate adaptation initiatives are not really quite effective is because the community is actually not included. I have seen some projects that have been actually implemented by development partners and donor agencies in our country and other side of parts of the world that have actually not been effectively implemented or did not achieve the desired result because the communities were not consulted. And for us to make sure that early warning is effective, the community needs to be involved where they are consulted, where their concerns are actually had, and these things are incorporated in the implementation process as well as when we are monitoring the decisions or the approaches that have been made. In addition to that as well, we need to make sure that the risk assessments are also inclusive. So that when I say that, I am meaning that groups and communities that are actually marginalized or haven't actually been included mostly in these processes are actually included in the sense that their vulnerability is respected and observed, as well as making sure that their vulnerability is not only included in the policy approach, but also when we're making the decisions. We know that mostly when we talk about climate-related issues, it is women and girls and children, as well as poor and rural community that are mostly disproportionately impacted and vulnerable. So how do we make sure that these communities that are actually mostly disproportionately impacted are included in the sense that the risks that they face is included in the processes, and that way it's going to help reduce the risks of these communities to climate change, as well as making sure that early warning system also includes them. Obviously, it needs to be gender inclusive, because we always say in the climate space that climate change actually has a feminine face. Because for us in Africa, we understand that women are not only the most affected when it comes to climate-related issues, but also their activities are mainly dependent on the natural environment. For instance, in the Gambia, where about 70% of our population actually depend on agricultural workforce, in that same agricultural sector or workforce, about 60 to 70% of that sector actually includes women. So that shows the importance and the value of women in the agricultural sector. And it's the same as well in Nigeria, because I've done some research. When I did my master's dissertation, I actually focused on Nigeria and how women farmers are actually included in climate decision making. And in that as well, I've seen that about 60 to 70% of the agricultural workforce in Nigeria as well consists of women. So this shows the importance and the value of women in the climate sector. And not only that, but also their level of vulnerability because of how well they depend on the natural environment. A UNICEF report in 2016 actually showed that women and girls in the global south spend over 200 million hours every single day, like 200 million hours every single day just to fetch water. That also is different from the social and the cultural activities that women actually engage in, especially us being mostly caregivers, we're in the homes, among others. So this shows how vulnerable women actually are to the impacts of climate change. And that is why early warning systems need to be gender responsive, not only including the vulnerability of women and girls to climate-related issues, but also making sure that the responses that we'll be making, or the actions and the activities as far as early warning systems are concerned, are including the challenges women face, as well as what needs to be done to make sure that it is more gender responsive, gender sensitive, and gender inclusive. Because at the end of the day, if it is not gender responsive, then it is leaving the most disproportionately affected by climate change, showing that it will not be effective. And also, another thing that has actually been left out in terms of the approaches for early warning system, especially effective one, is that we've more or less sort of like not been really including the voices of traditional and indigenous people. And for instance, in Africa, we have seen how our ancestors, our grandmothers, and even our mothers still use traditional knowledge for land use management and even weather pattern indicators, among others. So we need to make sure that the traditional and indigenous knowledge of these communities are incorporated when we are making decisions and approaches for early warning system, because these things are really crucial, and if they are left behind, then we are leaving a very important pillar for an effective early warning system. And finally, I know there is a time constraint there. I will say, obviously, the reason why we're even having this conference is because there was funding. If there wasn't funding, then we wouldn't have been actually able to have a successful event, among other things. So for the climate space, our governments, our institutions are making policies, but the policies will not be implemented if there isn't finance, if there isn't money. So the finance is really crucial for us to be able to have effective early warning systems in place. And even of recent, we've seen how the Africa Development Bank actually committed like about 10 billion for climate adaptation in Africa. And we have seen other, the Global North actually putting in money or pledging funding for our climate adaptation. But we need to make sure that there are like structures in place where the government actually has budgets for early warning systems, and also local authorities also have budgeting for early warning systems. And these things actually need to be continuous, and it needs to be effective and efficient. So when we have more funding, it makes it really easy for us to use technology, for us to use indigenous knowledge, for us to ensure there is community-based approach, among others. So there needs to be more funding, especially effective one, in place where we'll make sure that early warning systems are in place. As I always say, there is no climate action without climate justice. So it's really important that for our early warning systems and our climate action to be effective, among others, we need to make sure that climate justice is in place where all these things are actually considered and implemented. Thank you.
Gender responsive and also being community-centered in early warning systems organization. I have a question for you, Prof, later, but I would have to direct this to Nussbaumer James, who's the climate officer, econ section of the U.S. Embassy in Abuja. And my question is going to be that how can combine indigenous practice and advanced climate adaptation technology expedite the development of effective warning systems in Africa?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Zainab. Yeah, first I just want to thank the Center for Journalism, Innovation, and Development for organizing this important conference. Journalists obviously play a crucial role in the issues we're talking about. Adaptation, doesn't get enough attention. I'll be honest, as the climate officer, I spend a lot of time on mitigation, so I'm really glad to be here and to be thinking about and focusing on what more we can do on adaptation. Before I get to your question, I just have some general comments on climate, if it's all right. Addressing the climate crisis is obviously one of the top priorities of President Biden. It's a big part of our national security strategy. We've passed some really big laws over the past year, transformative laws. The Inflation Reduction Act, if you look at it, it's a historic piece of legislation. It's the largest ever investment in clean energy and climate action, projected to deliver at least 1 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. The United States, we're very proud of our partnership with Nigeria on climate issues. Nigeria has been a leader on the continent, for example, through the Climate Change Act of 2021, creating a National Climate Change Council, being a global methane pledge champion this year. I could go on, but I also want to get to the question. So, Zainab, you asked about the role of indigenous communities, is that right? Okay. Yeah, so one example I can point to in the United States, in the United States, we have indigenous people too, obviously, Native Americans. We have 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States that depend on traditional places, foods, lifestyles, and climate change poses a severe threat to these communities. They access, for example, fish, game, wild and cultivated crops. Of these 574 federally recognized tribes, 40% live in Alaska. So as you can imagine, the rapid pace of rising temperatures, the melting sea ice and glaciers, the thawing permafrost in Alaska has a really negative impact on the livelihoods in that state. So the role of traditional knowledge, as Fatou and others mentioned, is very important. I can just point to two examples that I've, very interesting topic. I know that in Alaska, there's a Native Tribal Health Consortium of local environmental observers, which chronicle climate change impacts on the landscape and on human health and are involved in developing adaptation strategies. And, these people are using interdisciplinary science, traditional knowledge, and just this network of local environmental observers to develop climate change health assessments. Another example I can give, the Navajo Reservation is a well-known Native American tribe in the United States, and during a recent drought, traditional knowledges were combined with other approaches as scientists worked with Navajo elders to observe and document meteorological and hydrological changes and other phenomena to assess and reduce disaster risks and vulnerabilities. The idea of tapping into that knowledge, the social and geographical history, the spiritual values, the traditional knowledges and worldview is something that, we're doing in the United States as well.
Thank you so much, James. And so now my question is going to be to Prof. When the impact of climate change strikes, the people that are mostly impacted are vulnerable communities, local communities. We also saw what happened in Katsina, Zamfara, and all of those northern states when the floods came on. We saw these people moving to other communities just to find solace and to find a better and safer haven to be on. And so my question is going to be, what are some of the practical methods or indicators for measuring the impact of early warning systems, especially in terms of reach and effectiveness as it affects vulnerable communities?
Thank you very much again. Let me situate what we are discussing for people to understand the importance. If you have a warning ahead of time with respect to the impact of climate change, a recent report by the Global Commission on Adaptation indicated clearly that an investment of just $800 million can reduce the anticipated impact and losses due to climate change by between $3 to $16 billion. If Nigeria, for instance, was able to use the early warning system very well last year, we will have been able to reduce our losses from the $6.5 billion in terms of losses alone, and about 600 people dead by so much. So the early warning system we are talking about is critical and needs to be very important. Government is doing its best now using the hydrological services and NIMET, but there must be a major improvement. It is because of the importance that the world attaches to the role of the early warning system that the World Meteorological Organization alone had about 54 indicators to recognize the success of any early warning system. We will not be able to go through all of them because they are very technical and we don't have the time. But they are all governed by 5 basic elements, of which the most important one, just like in our development, the first one is the governance. Any system you establish that is not properly governed is not likely to work. Even in this country, we can see a lot of challenges. Once we are able to really establish ourselves and govern ourselves very well, we will see we'll be making improvement. So governance is one area of the elements of early warning system. The second element that is very critical is that you cannot respond to something you do not understand, you don't have knowledge of. You do not even know the risk you are taking. It's so difficult for a fisher person to ask that person not to settle near a floodplain because there's nothing the person can do. Needs water to fish. But you can still be able to fish effectively and sustainably without endangering your life if you have good knowledge. So the second element of any early warning system that can help us to understand what is going on is what is called risk knowledge and management. How much knowledge do you have about it? How much risk do you understand that you are taking that will enable you to decide whether you are going to stay when the water is coming or you are going to leave? The third element is, do we have very good observations and capacity to forecast and detect? Unfortunately for my country, I think we have some elements of forecasting, but the real-time forecasting is still fairly weak, and that's why it is not easy for Nigeria to say the water that leaves Makurdi will reach Lokoja at this particular time. We can only say, well, in the next 2 or 3 days, it will reach there. But if the next 2 or 3 days happens to be midnight, when people are sleeping, it's likely to have more impact than if they knew that that water is going to flow and reach Lokoja at 10 p.m., and people will be able to really make a preparation. The next one is determination and communication. You may have all the equipment. You may be able to forecast. You may be able to say, but are you communicating? Are you communicating with the people? And that's what we want to emphasize, what my lady from Gambia is talking about. When you have all these facts, and as the governance structure for the early warning system is in place, you need a very effective communication. Government, for instance, in Nigeria, keeps on doing the same thing every year. Keep writing, the Director General of NIMET, to write a letter to the state governors. The Director General of the Hydrological Services will write letters to the state governors. But we all know that in this country, a letter that is telling everybody there is going to be water in your country by the governor may not be a priority. Like another letter that comes from a commissioner that says people are dying in a particular village. So most of these letters may not even leave the desk of the governors, or if they leave at all, maybe up to the commissioner, but to get to the people that really need that information. I think that is really very difficult for us. The last element of any good early warning system that is very important, upon which indicators are developed, is after knowing all these things, after being told, are you prepared to respond? Preparedness to respond is a major element of any good early warning system. So it is not enough for government to say, I told them. Government must prepare the people. This is what we are expecting. Everyone that is about 100 meters from the bank of River Niger between this particular time is likely to be flooded. What do you want to do? How do you do it? Put it in place. NEMA should not be to go and distribute blankets after the event. NEMA should be to prepare people to be ready to respond to what is likely to happen, to shift themselves and be able to recognize the series of various dangerous gambling they are doing. And these things are not cast in stone. Our people are not stupid. As the man from the US mentioned, indigenous knowledge is critical. You cannot go to Kwateji, for instance, and you're not a Nupe person, you don't know the place, and you want to follow them in their canoe, and you don't put on life jacket, you are going to die. But an average Nupe person is brought up to swim across the water. So if there's any capsizing at all, it's likely that person will survive. You that doesn't know how to swim. So you have to prepare yourself, and you have to be determined to respond. So briefly, some of these, the governance structure has about 7 indicators. I don't think which includes the number of hazards, the standard you are going to use, the agreements that we have made, because some of the things that we are talking about, we keep on repeating the same thing. There has been an agreement between Cameroon and Nigeria since the 80s. And one of the conditions for that agreement was that while that dam will be useful to us in Nigeria at all, we require to construct, I think, a minimum of about 4 dams in addition. Only 1 dam has been constructed so far, and it was just completed about 2 years ago. So therefore, any water that comes to Cameroon has nowhere to store it. It will just have to rush down. But there's an agreement. So we have to recognize that agreement. We have to understand the cross-border issues. Climate change does not know when it is in Kwara State or Kaduna State. No. River Niger does not know when it leaves Kebbi to come down to Niger, to come down to Kwara, to come down to Kogi, to go down to Anambra State, to move all the way to Bayelsa. It's just flowing. It's a system, and it must be treated as a system. So you must recognize that cross-border issue. The Cameroon water does not know it's leaving the Cameroon for Nigeria. It knows it's leaving a high mountain area to a lower level of cross-border. Women and men, equality, are they involved? It must be one of the things you must determine, whether that system is going to work. Men and women must be equally involved. The process with which you develop it, the process with which you establish it. And unfortunately, again, a critical element of this is the maintenance. A country, 10 years, 4 refineries, nothing, because they couldn't be maintained. It's the same thing. If you have early warning system and you do not maintain them, they break down. If you are talking about disaster, you ask the question in the area of knowledge, are the key hazards and related issues identified? Are you exposed? Is the risk information available? Are there monitoring systems? Do you have forecasting and warning services? Are there monitoring systems in place? Do you really understand the organizational and decision-making process, even within the community? There are some communities that if the Abba or the chief or the emir says, don't go out, people don't go out. So what type of decision have you have in that community that can allow the people to benefit from the early warning system? Are the communication systems and equipment in place, operational? It's not enough to have all these masks everywhere, and you go to the village, you cannot access the network. They are there, but are they operational? Are they working? Are they based on warnings communicated? Are we really prepared? Are public awareness and education campaign conducted? Do you have your public response tested and evaluated? NEMA should, I repeat, not be going after. You'll be going before, practice. If this flood comes in August, can we evacuate 100,000 people? They put it just like the military drill. so that by the time the water is coming, you'll be able to put something in place. Unless we do all these things, we'll just be talking about climate change, shouting about it, and the climate doesn't know whether you are shouting or not. It will continue to impact upon us. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Prof. So Fatou, at the end of this session, we are looking for a way forward, and we're looking for recommendations that government, civil society should put in place to help, champion this cause at the end of the day. And so my next question to you, Fatou, is that you mentioned gender inclusivity and community-based approach to some of these early warning systems. From your experience, are there case studies, even within the African context, or are there case studies in other countries that we can emulate from when, putting in place technological early warning systems as a continent?
Thank you so much. Just to take it from where Prof actually stopped in terms of our national disaster management agencies and our national environmental agencies. I think we really need to do better in terms of preparing for disaster rather than waiting until disaster happens and then we want to take actions. We continue to see in our African countries, after disasters like flooding, among others happen, we see our disaster management agencies with trucks going with bags of rice, bags of sugar, and just a little token of money. I mean, these do not solve our problems, because at the end of the day, when climate disasters happen, they will happen. As Prof mentioned, it doesn't matter. It will continue to happen as far as, we don't take effective and efficient actions. So I've mentioned some of the approaches that we could take, but obviously, the case studies, like some of the countries we could actually learn from to see how we could actually do better in terms of our early warning systems. I think one country I'll say is probably like Rwanda, because based on the research that I've done and what I've seen is like, they have actually been able to use different multi-hazard approach, especially for flooding, among others, to prepare the communities. For instance, they have actually been able to use like weather stations, as well as using local weather observers, working with local stations and local observers to actually predict or actually see what actually is expected in terms of some of the climate disasters. And when they actually get information, what they do is obviously an effective communication approach whereby they communicate some of these disasters that are expected to happen or some of the climate threats that are actually expected to happen via different channels like the radio stations communicating in different local languages so that people can expect or know what they are to expect in terms of the natural disasters actually happen. So for me, the lessons that I've actually learned is that there needs to be actually better technology to be able to predict some of the climate threats or disasters that are expected to happen. I think Prof briefly mentioned something about us having maybe like archaic technologies where actually is not able to predict like what's able to happen or what is happening in like hours or so, and it would take like days and all of that. So we need to make sure that we build our technology that can be able to effectively and efficiently predict what actually is happening. And also the issue of community participation, because all that we're doing is for our people and our population. So if there isn't public participation in early warning system, then it might defeat the purpose because we are doing that to protect them. So these are things that I actually think are lessons learned from the case of Rwanda in terms of the use of technology and also public participation as well. The other thing is, I believe in the panel here, we all agree that the issue of traditional and local knowledge is very important for climate adaptation. So another case is the issue of Ethiopia, where they actually are able to use traditional and local knowledge, and also the use of modern technology as well to be able to predict weather patterns, among others. So that as well, the case of technology as well as the use of indigenous knowledge continues to show how well it is important for effective early warning system as well. So we need to make sure that there is more focus and attention on early warning system, and also to build our technologies, and particularly to also further build the capacity of our public officials that are actually working in the climate space, especially in the use of certain technologies that will help predict weather patterns, among others. So that way, it's also going to help us a lot in making sure that there is more, at least work, or there is more impact in terms of what we're doing for early warning systems. And there are other cases for Senegal where they actually have been able to use some methods for drought prediction, among others, and as well as some of the African countries like Mozambique as well. So all in all, what this shows us is that we need to make sure that early warning systems or climate adaptation actually make sure that it focuses on the risks of individuals and communities, and also make sure that the solutions and the actions we're taking is tailored to the needs of communities. Because I've mentioned it initially, we all face different realities of climate change. So if we make sure there is effective community participation and the use of different other like technologies, among other initiatives or approaches that we could use, it will help us a long way in making sure that our early warning systems also have a climate justice approach, because a climate justice approach will help us, or will go a long way in making sure that the challenge in Africa we're facing is addressed. Because you've mentioned that for the case of Africa, especially from the north, there has been more focus on mitigation. And for us as a country and as Africans, we actually need more support on adaptation. That is why when we go to the global climate negotiations like the UNFCCC, there is a lot of back and forth with conversations, because Africa needs more investment and support on adaptation and not mitigation, because we're already facing the realities of climate change. It is happening. We continue to see on a daily basis the challenges that our communities are facing when it comes to climate-related issues. When you look at the case of Niger, we are seeing what is happening. When you see Nigeria in sub-parts of the continent, we are seeing clashes between farmers and herders because of what we are trying to struggle, or we are trying to scramble for natural resources. And you also look at other places in the Sahel where we are continuing to see climate-induced migration as well as other humanitarian crises. Even in the Gambia as well, we're seeing climate crisis or problems which is actually leading to land disputes among others. So we don't need mitigation, we need adaptation. And for climate adaptation to be effective, we need it to have a climate justice lens. That way, we will solve our problems.
Thank you so much, Fatou. Like I said earlier, this session is going to be very, very brief. And so after Nussbaumer's contribution, we're going to be taking questions. So get your questions ready. Our panelists are ready to respond to whatever question that you may have. And so my question to you, Nussbaumer, would be that are there specific policy recommendations or legislative changes that you believe are needed to enhance the role of early warning systems in achieving climate justice? Yes. Okay. So the question is, are there specific policy recommendations or legislative changes that you believe are needed to enhance the role of early warning systems in achieving climate justice?
Yeah, so the question of financing has come up a lot, and something I'd like to point to for the United States, our flagship adaptation initiative is called PREPARE. So that is the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, announced by President Biden in November 2021, with the goal of helping more than 500 million people in climate-vulnerable developing countries adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change. So we released a PREPARE action plan in September 2022, which is available online. You can look at it. And at COP27 last year, President Biden announced $150 million in new funding to accelerate PREPARE's work in Africa. And I think one way to look at your question is to look at, there's 3 pillars to the PREPARE plan. The first is knowledge and information, responding to the UN Secretary General's call to ensure early warning for all by, I think it's 2027, increase co-production and use of climate information. So, of course, early warning systems fall there. Making sure decision makers have the knowledge and the skills and the networks that they need to adapt to climate impacts. Second pillar of the PREPARE plan is plans and programs for infrastructure, water, health, and food security. And then finally, mobilizing finance and private capital. So, for example, President Biden's committed to working with Congress to provide $3 billion annually by 2024, which would be a 6-fold increase from the levels they're at now. I'll just also point out the U.S. has provided $1 billion to the Green Climate Fund and has announced plans to provide $25 million to Least Developed Countries Fund, and also working with Congress, $100 million to the Adaptation Fund. This is a question that the United States take seriously. And I think, as Fatou mentioned, a lot of these policies and programs, need financing to be implemented.
Thank you so much, Ms. Balma. So now I'm going to open the floor to our audience. If you have any questions that would like to ask our panelists, this is the time to do so. Let's start with the young man in blue.
Thank you very much. My name is Emmanuel Oladipo from Wikitimes. I have two questions. One to Mr. James. As you have said, and at a point, United States has been supporting Nigeria in its fight, or in its effort to adapt to the climate realities. Now, mostly the support is at the center, and at the local level, at the subnational level, especially at state and local government level, mostly even the officials, when you talk to them, you'll be disappointed in terms of issues of climate change. I once talked to an official of a state government in northern Nigeria. He said that climate, is a foreign something. And this is a government official. I am saying this with all pain because I'm a farmer. I know what I lost this year because where I farm, in Bauchi, for example, the state recorded less rain this year compared to what happened last year. So how can United States tailor support to reach actually the local communities in Nigeria so that there could be impact at the end of the day? And secondly, to the prof, I don't know whether there is a need, for example, to have a coordinated communication policy that will drive conversation on Nigeria's climate activities, right from adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. Because you discover that NIMET, for instance, last year they give prediction that there will be a flood in Nigeria, and this year also they gave prediction. But over the years, you discover that farmers are not getting that information adequately. And of course, I know I have a responsibility as a journalist to do that, but we can't do it alone. The journalists cannot be able to do that alone. So there has to be a kind of input from all quarters. So I don't know whether Nigeria needs that kind of communication policy that will help in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. And so I think we'll start with Nussbaumer. Mr. James, if you could respond to his question. Okay. Who's the next person then? Okay.
Thank you very much. I am Abina. So different speakers have acknowledged the role of money, funding, particularly I think Fatou, and then he's mentioned U.S. Embassy, U.S. government's money that is making provision for. But if you listen to what our friend from Wikitimes has just spoken about, a lot of these monies are staying at the top in the hands of people who don't quite see how to bring it to the bottom. I'm wondering what would it take and who should be in the driving seat to get local people, communities, to take charge of climate action. What would that look like? And who should be in the driving seat of those kinds of interventions that are not top-down, but rather bottoms-up?
Interesting. Okay, thank you so much. My question is to Prof. and also Mr. James, but I think I'll start with Mr. James. You mentioned that the U.S. government has given money to Nigeria. Does the government of the United States get to monitor the usage of these monies that you give to the Nigerian government? And also to Prof, from your assessment, do you think it's a case of lacking the technical know-how to deploy these technological tools that we need to address climate issues through early warning systems? Or do you think it's a case of not having the interest at all? Because we've been talking about it. I recall during Buhari's administration, he went to COP26 or 27, if my memory serves me right, and he made several commitments. And now we have a new government, and we barely hear them talk about it. So please help me out with that. Thank you.
Do we have more?
Well, good afternoon. Usually when you do stories related to flooding incidents in Nigeria and you reach out to the government, they tell you, oh, we've told those people to leave the floodplains. There's nothing we can do anymore. Whatever they face, it's their fault. And then I heard Mr. James talk about the experience of the United States respecting indigenous people in Alaska. And I'm wondering, are there lessons that we can learn from how the authorities over there engage with people in the rural communities to ensure that they are insulated from these environmental disasters that perhaps Nigeria can also improve on?
My name is Zainab Bala. My question is somehow similar to the Wiki Times mine, but I'm from Borno. In my own state, we are experiencing desert encroachment, but we usually have heavy rainfall, and at times the rainfall is low. I did a story recently, and I noticed that some farmers, for example, a woman planted 20 models of groundnut and none germinated. So when I asked her what did she know about climate change, she seems to say no. Some of them will say it's from God. But then I noticed some of them know that when they plant something here on lowland, it can easily be washed away by water. And when they plant on the place that is higher, it might not germinate. And again, there is this particular pest that affects their plants when there are no rainfall. So now, how will they bridge this gap to be environmental and climatic aware so that they will know that when they plant certain types of crop, there might be better yields or not during the time because the rain is something else?
Okay, so I think we're going to start with you, Prof. If you could start responding to some of the questions.
Thank you very, very much. I think I'm so happy. Again, one of the reasons why I participate in some of these meetings is just because of my age, and I know I have just maybe 1 or 2 more decades to go. And I want a lot of people to learn and learn and learn. And while thanking CJID for inviting me, I had 2 meetings at the same time. I had to cancel their own, but I made a promise that I would be here for the panel just because I wanted to share ideas. A lot of the questions are related. Before I answer them, I want to bring CJID into the center. All of these boil down to level of awareness. How much do people know? How much does the government itself know? And that says the media needs to play a role more. I have one of my daughters here from Channels. Is she still here? I saw her today. Channels, what's her name? Ayola. Is Ayola still here? She usually invites me to Channels. I talk about flood. What did I tell you last? I said, I'm not coming again. Because I keep on saying the same thing. We are not responding well. We are not doing things right. We are not integrating. We are not looking from vertical to lateral development. And it's not only in the area of climate change. The national development of Nigeria is not integrated. An average governor of the state decides what he or she wants to do. Doesn't matter what the federal government wants to do. Because they all know the Constitution from page 1 to the last page, that they have autonomy. But if you don't work together, if there's a big policy at the federal government and cannot be translated to the state level by the governors, to the local government level by the chairpersons, how will it get to the community? It keeps on hanging. So the media has to play a role. I'm always happy when people send me information. Please, I'm working on this. Can you give me answers? I keep on saying. But I realize I'm saying the same thing every year. Flood in Lagos. How can you tackle flood in Lagos when you are not doing anything different? It will not work. So let me start the question, answer one by one. Is there a need for a coordinated policy to drive the response of Nigeria as a nation to the challenge of climate change? Absolutely yes. And I'm happy to inform you that since the Climate Change Act was formulated in November 2021. The National Council on Climate Change has been established. It has a secretariat headed by a national, by Director General. It's like a boy to me too. Not because he's not bright, but because of my age over him. And they are working on what we call a National Climate Change Action Plan. By the grace of God, I'm facilitating that. And one of the things I want to assure you is the issue of the governance of the Nigeria's climate change response, whereby the need for the federal, the state, the local government, communities, non-government organizations, and development partners to work together in unison to be able to address the challenge. It doesn't matter who supports you. It doesn't matter what American government does, or the British government does, or French government does, or UN does, as long as these activities are not couched in a coordinated manner that can reinforce each other, we will never see the impacts of these interventions. So I agree with you that there's a need for it, and I assure you that as long as they give me the opportunity to drive that climate change action plan for Nigeria, that will be my emphasis to make it available. That leads to the question. Within that action plan, there must be a communication strategy. The National Council on Climate Change, we need a communication strategy. So if CGA, ID feel that they have the capacity to help drive that policy, you don't have to wait. Approach them. Don't wait till you have money. If you have money from elsewhere, use it and help the country to have a communication strategy on climate change that you can sell and make sure that it influences the policy, not only at the executive, but also at the legislative and even at the other levels of governance, both at the federal and the state. Who should be in the driving seat to ensure that development resources that come from development partners, go below the federal level? A very big challenge, very serious challenge, but I think what we should be looking forward to is that council now, because it has all the ministers as members of the council. They should be, and I'm advocating to them that at least each sectoral, what do we call it now, geopolitical zones, the 6 geopolitical zones must have one governor each represented at that council, so that, or the governors forum, whatever it is, so that whatever is being done at the federal level should be able to come that one. So it's going to be an easy thing. Is it lack of technology or lack of information and know-how? I respect my Baba Buhari, but he was the president of the country. And some of you are civil servants here wrote this statement for him. And he read it. But can you check any of the national budget for the last 10 years and see whether there's any line for climate change? Everything we have been doing in this country so far has been on what USAID is able to give, what DFID is able to support, what UNDP is giving, what FAO is doing, what UNIDO is doing, what the Green Climate Fund is giving, what Adaptation Fund is ready to release, what the UNFCCC is ready to give. National commitment is different from just making statements in this global conference. I've attended since 2009, I've been attending the Conference of Parties. And I decided to stop it because I'm not really seeing the impact on Nigeria. We go, after about 2 weeks of good talk, we come back. The following year, can we say what we discussed last year, these are the things we have done in this country, and these are the way we are going. Whereas other developed countries that we are talking about, they are not helping us. Every conference of parties I've attended, they've always come up with one innovation or the other to address the challenge of climate change. Not because they just want to help us or them alone, but because they've seen climate change as a development challenge. Nigeria must recognize climate change as part of our development. Without it, no matter what you invest, if you have money and you give farmers all the fertilizers in the world, if it doesn't rain on time, the fertilizer is wasted. If you have money and you give farmers all the things they need and they plant in a place that is flooded, the money is gone. Olam lost more than 40,000 hectares of land, was it? The last 2022 flood. All the rice they planted more or less washed away. Why? Because they couldn't think how to have dams nearby to use. Finally, desertification. I started my own career in climate change in '75, writing about desertification. We're not talking about climate change there. We're talking more about desertification and drought. The northern part of Nigeria will continue to be a victim of drought and desertification. The only thing that is happening is that we are now witnessing an accentuated and exacerbated, a more impacted aspect of this as a result of climate change. So your people have to learn, your government must tell people, let them understand that extreme weather events, sometimes it will be a lot of rain, it will stop and it will break. The emphasis is to have a system that will respond to this extreme event. To stop it, forget it. To respond well, you can do it. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Prof. So let's quickly take Mr. James's response, and then we quickly wrap up the session. We have one more question online, but we're going to do this really, really very quickly. So, Mr. James, I don't know if you still have the questions, or would you like me to remind you?
Yeah, I'll do my best with some of the questions that were asked. I know the gentleman in blue asked about working more with subnational, working at the subnational level, which I think is really important. I think one example could point to at COP28, which is coming up. We're looking forward to working with partner countries on a new initiative called Lowering Organic Waste, Methane in the Waste Sector. This is mitigation, not adaptation, but it's something that we're working not just with the federal government on, but with some state governments. I'm not ready to announce which ones yet, but waste is obviously something that's managed at the state level, local level. So that's an example, I think, that illustrates your points. I guess just to address, I think, a misunderstanding. I mentioned some dollar amounts. They weren't specific for Nigeria. A lot of this is kind of Pan-African, and it doesn't mean we're writing checks to governments. A lot of times it's technical assistance, hiring experts, or it could be project finance. The U.S. Development Finance Corporation has a requirement to fund projects that are 51% private owned. So, that's, financing private sector projects. So that's my responses there.
Okay, thank you, James. We have one more question from someone online, and then we'll wrap up the session after the response. And the question is, climate change has affected thousands of individuals in Yobe North that has had led shortage of rainfall, which results in poor agriculture, leading to poor harvest. What can the community do to overcome this challenge at their own level? And the second one is, how can such community that do not have access to the internet and do not believe in such weather forecast work with early warning systems? Prof is going to be answering this because this is more in the Nigerian context. Briefly, Prof, if you can respond to this question.
Thank you very much. It boils down to what we have been saying. We are in an era of erratic behavior. We didn't have time to go into the physics of climate change. But I want to tell you one thing, that what humanity has done is to eject a lot of gases, without which we cannot live. Those greenhouse gases you don't want to hear about, they are the ones keeping us alive here. If they are not here, if they are not within the air we live in, the Earth's average temperature will be minus 18 degrees C, so nobody will stay here. So we need the greenhouse gases. But what we don't need is the huge amount that we are pumping into the atmosphere. Unfortunately, since 1850, the present, we have pumped so much of this, and unfortunately, my American knows that and China are responsible for about 40% of these gases being pumped into the air. What we are pumping off has made the atmosphere to be very crazy. And when somebody is crazy, what does the person do? Sometimes the person will be very nice to you, isn't it? Another time, we abuse you. Another time, they want to even beat you up. That's exactly what the weather is doing to us. This day might rain very well, another day it will stop. This year in particular, if you notice, it started pretty late in the north. It brought a lot of water at a time, and then ceased again. And then came back late. We are still getting some rain in Abuja. We are still getting some rain in Lagos. Ideally, it would have stopped by now. But because of the essence of it started late after it broke, it is still rain. Up to December, it might be getting rain in Abuja and many parts of Lagos. So we have to really have this early warning system forecasting that we'll be able to tell farmers, don't plant at this time. Plant this one. Look for seeds that instead of 3 months for corn, for maize, you can germinate and grow up within 1 month. So that if the rain comes within 1 month, we'll still be able to have it. So all we need is that the communities cannot do anything on their own if they don't believe. Any community that doesn't believe there's climate change, there's nothing we tell them, they will say, no, don't worry about it. God controls everything. God controls everything, but gives us the knowledge to understand what he controls so that we can respond to it effectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. If we stick around here, we're going to be having this conversation for a very, very long time. But unfortunately, we have to come to the end of this session so that other people can also come on board. Thank you so much for listening. I hope we've learned a thing or two. Let's continue to fight for climate justice and communicate more effectively to drive the climate change cause. Thank you so much.